Hello, bruvs. We're back with Buried Alive, the terrifying history of our most primal fear. I don't know if it is our most primal fear, but we also got some beer. Our most primal beer. That shit's good. Dirty bastard. Let me take a drink from the cup. Give me a big old foamy mustache here. Way too much foam. I'll have to wait till it goes down. Of course, I poured it like a savage, but. Alright, Buried Alive. What are we on, chapter 2? The Lady with the Ring and the Lecherous Monk. The Lady with the Ring and the Lecherous Monk. Or is it Lecherous? Lecherous. The doctor, he sat by Frau Richermann's side with his anti-epidemical, but the fearful disease permitted no ease and baffled each drug and chemical. So he rose from his chair with a solemn air, and thrice he shook his head, and he said with a sigh that was all my eye, Frau Richermann is dead. Let me move this. Discard of this can. And proceed. Ow. Thus begins the humorous poem, a tale of old Cologne, anonymously published in the Notes and Queries of 1882 after another correspondent to this periodical had brought up the subject of an ancient example of a miraculous rescue from premature burial, the tale of Frau Richmondus von Adocht in the Newmarket, an ancient square in the old town of Cologne, lived the patrician family von Adocht. Menginus and his wife Richemondus. Their house was known as Die Papagian, since a sign with the family arms, 3 crowned parrots, was prominently displayed in 1357. The legend tells Frau Richmondus became indisposed and died after a short period of illness. She was buried in state, and her grieving husband had allowed a valuable gold ring to remain on her finger. Snug under the dome, in a stately tomb, Frau Richermann is laid. The glare of the day has passed away, and a mass for her soul has been said. 'Tis deep midnight when the noisome sprite plays leapfrog over the grave. What man then in here who seems not to fear the wrath of the dead to brave? 'Twas the sexton, and few were the words he spoke, and he breathed not a word of sorrow, but he said, if I cabbage that ring tonight, I shall be all the richer tomorrow. Armed with the spade, a crow, and a lantern, the sexton set out to dig up her coffin. He hauled the coffin out of the grave and forced the lid open, but when the sacrilegious robber tried to pull the ring off the corpse's cold finger, he was unable to move it over the knuckle, and drew a knife to cut the finger off. But scarce was the blade to the cold skin laid, ere, horror of horrors to tell, the death-cold claw grasped the sexton's paw, and the knife from his clutches fell. Well, what did he do? Just as I, Six or you, would have done in a similar plight. In a swoon he fell down on the cold clammy stone, and in falling banged out his light. From Richemont rose, not so dead, you'll suppose, as it seemed when she was buried, hit the sexton a blow on the shins with his crow, and into the city she hurried. After this fortunate escape from the tomb, Frau Richmondus picked up the sexton's lantern, which she used to light her way to the family house in the Newmarket. She knocked on the door again and again until finally a servant came to open it, but the superstitious menial, fearful of ghosts, fled yelling when he saw the shrouded figure of his former mistress standing outside. Herr von Adacht was called, but he too was very frightened. Herr Richmont groaned, and Herr Richemont moaned, and he uttered a hideous scream. What's up, bruv? For facing him there stood a ghastly nightmare, intruding herself on his dream. O goblin immortal, of avaunt from my portal, back to your region so drear. For my wife I have lost her, thou ghostly impostor. She's there, so she can't be here. Frau Richmodus pleaded with her incredulous husband and the servants to be let indoors, but they were convinced she was a ghost. Herr von Aducht even said it was just as impossible that his wife left her tomb and returned to her house, as it would be for his horses to leave their stables and run up the back stairs to the top floor of the house. But then a second miracle took place. The hell is that symbol? The words were scarce spoken when a wild neighing broke on the silence of the night. At the window, I ween, two horses were seen in the glimmering, pale moonlight. Herr Richemont saw, and he crossed himself o'er from the tip of his nose to his chest. Then, seizing his wife in her new-found life, he clasped her once more to his breast. The tale of Richmodus von Adacht is certainly very old. The Kohlhoff Chronicle of Cologne, published in 1499, mentions that a wife in that city had been prematurely buried and disinterred alive by a gravedigger who had wanted to steal her ring. The year of this memorable happening is 1400, and although the Papagian house in the Newmarket is mentioned, the name Richmodus von Adacht is not. The next mention of the legend is 1582, when Dr. Johann Ewick described the painting in the Apostelkirche in Cologne that depicted the miraculous return from the grave of an unnamed woman in that town. In 1604, the publisher Johann Brussenmacher issued a print of the original painting in the Apostelkirche. With some additional designs, he also gave a much more complete account of the memorable events of 1357. Richmodus von Adacht, the wife of a local magistrate, was declared dead after a plague epidemic. Rescued from the tomb and taken back by her startled husband, she stayed with him for 7 more years and gave birth to 3 sons, all of whom took holy orders. She was known for her piety and industry and wove an immense quantity of linen, some of which could still be seen suspended next to the painting on her tomb in the Apostelkirche. Brussenmacher also appended a poem, of which I render a partial translation. When, with that ring, they buried her, the husband's tears were running, but the gravedigger took note of it with malice and with cunning, and when the shade of night came down, as sure as it came, he, with prentice, lad, and lantern, to help him dig and see. They hoped the coffin case to haul out of the churchyard ground, and that the golden ring could still by them be found. But when the lad the casket lid was raising with his knife, the lady in the coffin sat up and came to life. And I'll go back to this so we can see this before I continue. Richmuth von Adoch rises from the tomb in this German print, engraved by Johann Bussenmacher in Cologne, 1604. In the background can be seen the funeral procession, right, and the resuscitated woman's attempt to gain entry into her house on the left. Is that her right there? Thanks to several reissues and re-engravings of the Bussenmacher print, the memorable tale of Richmodus von Adacht became well known throughout Europe. It was mentioned in Simon Goulard's popular Histories Admirables and Et Memorables, and in many other historical chronicles and repositories of memorable anecdotes. But it is worthwhile to examine two other independent sources of the same legend. In 1688, the French traveler Maximilien Misson came to Cologne, where he visited the Apostelkirche and saw the painting and the linen exhibited there. When he made inquiries, he was told that the miracle of Richmodus von Auducht had occurred in 1571. The utilitarian German who told the story added the happy ending that Herr von Auducht and his wife had made machines necessary to let down the horses. He also went to the New Market, where he saw two sculpted wooden horses' heads emerging from the upper windows of an old house. Baron Risbeck, another traveler, was even more incredulous. He considered the entire story just another example of the superstition and credulity of the good burghers of Cologne. Now let me get some beer, buffs. This stuff will start kicking my ass any minute. In 1785, the part of the Apostelkirche containing the painting of Richmondus von Auducht was demolished. The ancient linen that had been kept in the church for more than 200 years was saved and put on display for the many credulous people who wanted to see this relic of the lady with the ring. But it was later found that it was a late 12th century fasting cloth and had nothing whatsoever to do with the legend of Richmondus von Auducht. Another German scholar discovered that there had really been a Richmondus von Auducht, or von der Auducht. She came from the noble family of von Lecherous and was married to Waltimus Mengen von Auducht, just as the legend told. The problem was that her husband had died before 1342, and that the will of Richmodus von Auducht, which was still kept in the Cologne city archives, specified that she was by this time, 1346, in late middle age and had 8 children alive. Moreover, the von Auducht family lived not in the Papagian house, but in quite another dwelling in the old section of Cologne. These observations make it unlikely that Richmodus von Auducht was really the lady with the ring who had almost been buried alive in the 14th or 15th century. Some scholars have concluded that the story is a complete fabrication, but it should be noted that since there was a particularly severe plague epidemic in Cologne in 1349, one of the presumed corpses might have revived in the cemetery, thereby providing the catalyst for this remarkable legend. The name Richmodus von Auducht, the story of the robber, and the ludicrous episode of the horses all being later additions. As was noted in the preceding chapter, the theme of the prematurely buried heroine rescued by robbers who want to steal valuables from the tomb was known already in the 2nd century A.D. At any rate, Richmodus von Auducht has obtained an undeserved fame before posterity, and the story of the lady with the ring is still told in Cologne. A street near the New Market was named Richmodus Strasse after her in 1877, and from the upper windows of what is nowadays called the Richmodus House, the 2 sculpted horses' heads still look out onto the busy square below. When Baron Risbeck declared himself to be a firm unbeliever in the tale of the lady with the ring in 1785, his main argument was that he knew that exactly the same story was current in several other German towns. In 1920, the German ethnologist Dr. Johannes Bolt made a detailed survey of the legend and was amazed to find that not fewer than 19 other German cities, Hamburg, Dresden, and Lubeck among them, had a lady with the ring story of their own. Often the lady was named and additional details given. In at least 11 instances, horses' heads were on display as memorials of the ludicrous ending of the tale. In Freiburg, a casting cloth allegedly woven by the heroine was on prominent display, just as in Cologne. The fame of the lady with the ring does not end there. A story well known among the English aristocracy in the 19th century was that of Emma, Countess of Mount Edgecombe. Like Richmodus von Aduct, she was a real person. Born in 1729 and married in 1761. With her husband, the Earl, she lived at the family mansion of Cothell House in Cornwall. With her husband, the Earl, she lived at the family mansion of Cothell House in Cornwall. The legend tells that she was erroneously declared dead and buried in the family vault, but rescued by a thieving sexton who broke into the vault to steal her valuable rings. Dressed only in her shroud, she slowly and painfully made her way back to Cothell House along a path that was ever after known as the Countess's Path. Is that the right page? Another lady with the ring is awakening from her death trance beside her open coffin. The corpse of the inevitable sexton, who has been struck dead with fright, is lying beside her, one of the curious illustrations in The Uncertainty of the Signs of Death, the 1746 English edition of Bruyère's book. The Earl of Mount Edgecombe, just as startled as the lugubrious Her Richemont, let out a shriek when he saw her. Believing her to be the ghost of his wife, he refrained from uttering any silly oaths about horses running upstairs, however, and simply went down to let his wife indoors. When Dr. Robert Wilkins, author of the Fireside Book of Death, examined the story further, he could find no record of the death and funeral of the Countess in the relevant parish archives. The path from the family vault to the house was 10 miles long, and would thus have been quite a strenuous walk for a lady who had just awakened from a death trance. Furthermore, exactly the same story was current about one of the Countess's forebears, Lady Anne Edgecombe, who had lived in the preceding century. Similar legends were current in several other noble families. What is purported to be the oldest of all is also from Cornwall. The 14th century tale of Anna of Benallay, which was the subject of a poem by the Reverend Robert Stephen Hawker, containing these lines: "They shrouded her in maiden white, they buried her in pall, and the ring he gave his troth to plight shines on her finger small. Shame, shame, those rings of stones and gold." The ghastly caitiff said, "Better that living hands should hold than glitter on the dead. The evil wish wrought evil deed, the pall is rent away, and lo, beneath the shattered lid the flower of Benallay. But life gleams from these opening eyes, blood thrills that lifted hand, and awful words are in her cries which none may understand." Nice reading. You should try a Five Nights at Freddy book. Right. I'm probably never going to read a Five Nights at Freddy book. Although I did give one of my coworkers a Five Nights at Freddy book. Maybe she'll give it back. There are numerous other English ladies with the ring. One was Lady Catherine Wyndham, the mother of the first Earl of Egremont, who was entombed in the family vault at St. Decumans in Somerset. Another was Mrs. Hannah Goodman, wife of the Reverend Richard Goodman, vicar of Ballymodon, Bandon. The memorial tablet to Constance Whitney in the Church of St. Giles, without Cripplegate, in London, representing her rising from her coffin, was said to commemorate her rescue from the tomb through the cupidity of a sexton, although rationalists objected that it was more likely to represent the pious hope of her resurrection in heaven, as supported by the inscription underneath. Miss Wynn's Diaries of a Lady of Quality name a certain Mrs. Killigrew as the lady with the ring, and similar legends were current in the families of Longstone in Derbyshire, and the Barons St. John in Bedfordshire. In Scotland, there were lady with the ring stories about Marjorie Elphinstone, who lived in Tanis in the early 17th century, and about Margaret Holcrow Erskine, mother of the founders of the Secession Church of Berwickshire, who was widely reported to have died in 1674, only to be rescued by the usual thieving sexton out to steal her ring. Northern Ireland has its own lady with the ring, Marjorie McCall from Lurgan County, Armagh, who lived sometime in the early 18th century. The story is well known locally, and the tablet on Mrs. McCall's gravestone still bears the inscription Marjorie McCall lived once, buried twice. The fishing village of Lunenburg in Nova Scotia, Canada, has yet another lady with the ring legend, which probably originated with the German settlers who arrived there in the 18th century. Let's see what this is. The interior of the Church of St. Giles without Cripple. What the fuck is without Cripplegate in London? A drawing by John Carter in 1781. To the left can be seen the monument to Constance Whitney, one of the several British incarnations of the Lady with the Ring, who is arising from her tomb. Copyright Guildhall Library, Corporation of London. The tale of the Lady with the Ring also occurs in Scandinavian popular mythology. In Sweden, 5 variants of the traditional tale exist. For example, several works of local history claim that the mother of the master mechanic Carl Jacob Hubling of Karlstad was saved from the grave by a thieving gravedigger. 2 other versions of the legend have a special twist. In the more benign form, the lady with the ring chokes on a piece of meat and is declared dead. The inevitable sexton digs her coffin up and, to pull her ring off, puts his knee out on the chest of the presumed corpse. The piece of meat is then forced up the gullet, and the lady revives. The magnanimous husband gives the sexton the ring as a present for saving his wife's life. In the darker version, the ruthless Scandinavian grave robbers show that they are made of sterner stuff than their wimpish French and German counterparts. Far from fainting or dying from shock, when the lady with the ring revives in her coffin, they beat her to death with their spades, steal her jewelry, and bury her for good this time. In the 17th and early 18th centuries, the Historia Valdi Memorabilis was a peculiar phenomenon. Oft-repeated, memorable stories with a moral that existed in many variations. One example is the legend of the noblewoman who insulted a poor beggar woman with twins. As the result of a curse, the noblewoman herself gave birth to 365 children, as many as the days in a year. The original version of this legend concerned Countess Margaret of Henneberg, who died in Leusden, Holland in 1276. But there were several later versions of this legend, all with different protagonists from the European nobility. Then there was the memorable story of the evil bishop in the Mouse Tower. In the year 913, Bishop Hatto of Mainz deliberately burned a barn full of starving people, and as a suitable punishment, an army of rats marched toward the bishop's palace. Although Hatto repaired to a mouse tower built on a steep rock in the Rhine to serve him as a refuge in such an emergency, the rats swam the Rhine and devoured the prelate there. Again, this tale was repeated with relish about many other evil persecutors of the poor. The legend of the Lady with the Ring is another of these memorable stories. It spread from 15th century Germany to become well known, with different names and dates attached, in almost every European country. Since it lacked the wholly ludicrous elements of other widespread stories about bishops eaten by mice and girls born with pigs' heads as a divine punishment to the mother The tale of the Lady with the Ring survived their gradual demise in the 18th century, and many variations of it were still current in late 19th century folklore. Nor was the Lady with the Ring legend the only popular tale about swooning ladies being saved from the tomb. There existed several legends on this theme, all in many variations, and the great majority can be presumed to be complete inventions. However, they are of considerable importance since these idle tales were uncritically repeated by most later writers on premature burial, from the somber Latin pages of the doctoral thesis to those of the vulgar anti premature burial pamphlet. The oldest and most famous was the legend of the Lady in the Ring, closely followed by another variation on the same theme, known at least since the 14th century, the legend of the two young lovers. They are forbidden to marry by the young lady's stern father, who prefers a wicked nobleman or tax collector as his son-in-law. Filial piety makes her go along with this scheme, and she jilts her childhood sweetheart, but she cannot stand being separated from him and is unhappy in her marriage. She gradually falls into a decline and finally dies from the effects of a broken heart. Her grief stricken ex fiance visits her tomb in the family vault and plans to cut his throat with a razor there, but the girl awakens from her death like trance. Just in the nick of time to stop him. In one version, they visit the wicked nobleman, and he drops dead on seeing the presumed ghost of his wife. The French tax collector, the villain in the other version, is made of sterner stuff. Not only does he survive the shock of seeing his wife return from the dead, but he actually tries to reclaim her as his lawful wife, thereby forcing the young couple to escape to England. The two young lovers are reunited after the lady has been rescued from her premature tomb. Another illustration is the 1746 in the 1746 English edition of Bruyère's book. An early and oft-repeated version of the tale of the two young lovers takes place in Florence during the Great Plague in 1400, which circumstance also provides a good excuse for the hasty burial of the heroine Ginevra di Amiri, to the despair of her faithful lover Antonio Rondinelli. Interestingly, there is some overlap between the early version and the Richemodus von Aduct story. Just a few days after receiving the wedding ring from the man she detests, but is forced to marry, Ginevra, or is it Ginevra? Ginevra dies from the plague and is buried alive. She awakes in the tomb and forces her way out, returning to her lawful husband, as a dutiful wife should, along a path that was long sentimentally revered in Florence and called the Way of Death. Just like Richemodus von Aduct's husband, poor Ginevra's spouse, or is it Ginevra's? Am I saying it wrong? I am. Ginevra's spouse is a superstitious soul and shuts his door against the shrouded ghost that demands entry. At the houses of her father and uncle, she is also treated with horror and dismay. She then seeks out the faithful Antonio Rondinelli with the agonizing cry, "I am no spirit, Antonio. I am that Ginevra you once loved, but who was buried alive." They are blissfully united and later marry in the Cathedral of Florence, to the dismay of her lawful husband, whom the bishop considers to have forfeited both his wife and her valuable dowry. The causes célèbres of Gaillot de Pitaval recounts another version of this memorable story at length. The two protagonists being the son and daughter of two merchants living in the Rue Saint-Honoré in Paris. A third memorable tale is that of the lecherous monk, which can also be found in the Causes Célèbres. A young French gentleman is forced to become a monk by his religious parents without having a vocation. While traveling to the monastery, he stops at an inn. The innkeeper persuades him to watch over the corpse of his beautiful young daughter, who died the day before. At the sight of her, the monk forgot the sanctity of his vows and took liberties with the corpse. After the monk's departure, the apparently dead girl comes back to life. As fate would have it, the monk returns to the inn 9 months later, and to his no small surprise, sees the girl alive and with a newborn child in her arms. He at once tells the parents that he is the child's father, casts off his monkish gown, and offers to marry their daughter. The innkeeper and his wife are delighted to have this handsome and well-mannered young man as their son-in-law, although the lecherous ex-monk confessed in so many words to having raped their daughter while he presumed her to be a corpse. A fourth memorable story is that of the careless anatomist. By far the most famous version of this tale concerns none other than the famous anatomist Andreas Vesalius, author of the De Humani Corporis Fabrica. According to a widely disseminated legend, Vesalius was once consulted by a Spanish noblewoman. After the death of his patient, he wanted to discover the origin of her illness and asked the family's permission to open the body. To the horror of both Vesalius and the noblewoman's relatives who were present to watch, the heart of the presumed corpse was found to be still beating. The family accused Vesalius of murder and denounced him to the Spanish Inquisition. Had King Philip II of Spain not interceded in his behalf, he would have been sentenced to death. The tribunal granted Vesalius a pardon, but only on the condition that he make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and Mount Sinai to expiate his crime. It is true that Vesalius left Madrid for Venice in early 1564, but this was because the king had sent him there on a diplomatic mission. After some weeks in Venice, Vesalius went to Jerusalem for reasons that have been debated. Was he banished as in the tale of the careless anatomist? Did he go to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage or on a research expedition? Or was he simply, as Father Suertius put it in his Athena Belgicae of 1628, weary of life at court and of the brawlings of his wife? At any rate, Vesalius never returned. On the return journey from Jerusalem, the ship was almost wrecked in a tempest, and Vesalius died on board in a catarrh and was buried on the island of Zant between Cyprus and Greece. The earliest allusion to the tale of the distinguished anatomist who dissects a patient prematurely comes from a contemporary of Vesalius. The celebrated French surgeon Ambroise Paré wrote in his Ambroise, how would you say that? Ambroise Paré wrote in his 1571 Treatise de la Generation that he did not advise that the opening of the dead body be performed in undue haste, particularly when regarding the dire fate of a famous anatomist who was then residing in Spain. The anatomist had opened the body of a woman thought to have died from suffocation of the womb, but at the second stroke of the anatomist's razor, she began to move and give other signs that she was still alive. The famous anatomist was exiled from Spain and died of grief shortly afterward. Paré does not name Vesalius as the careless anatomist, but Fortunio Fideli did so in his 1602 treatise De Relationibus Medicorum. The full version, which details about the Inquisition and the intercession of the king, was published in Melchior Adams's Vitae Germanorum Medicorum in 1620, and was alleged to have derived from a letter written by the diplomat Hubert Languet in 1565. Already in the 19th century, a learned biography of Vesalius pointed out that no person who had known Vesalius during life mentioned his fatal error, not even his friend Delecluse, who came to Madrid just when Vesalius left this city. Nor was the error of Vesalius at all mentioned in the annals of the Spanish Inquisition. The Vesalius legend is likely to have been influenced by another tale concerning an illustrious Spaniard, Cardinal Diego de Espinosa, Bishop of Sigüenza and Prime Minister to the aforementioned Philip II of Spain. One day King Philip spoke harshly to this gentleman and reminded him that he was speaking to the President of Castile. The cardinal, who until that moment had himself been president of Castile, understood that the king had dismissed him ignominiously from this office and fell to the ground as if stunned. He had no pulse and did not breathe. Every person present marveled that the king's wrath had slain his minister. It was then decided that the cardinal should be embalmed, but when the dissection was well advanced, the cardinal awoke with a scream of agony and attempted to struggle with the careless anatomist. All attempts to save him were of no avail, and the cardinal died before the comforts of religion could be administered to him. And that's the end of chapter 2 there, Bubba. That's the end of chapter 2. Get in your casket.